in the course of the 20th century, most of that goes away in American cities, and the street becomes too dangerous for anything other than cars. And as a result, cities become a lot less pleasant places to be. And it's part of the reason I think you get suburbanization happening, where people are like, I don't want to be in that, crowded, dangerous environment. I want to go home into a relaxing, quieter place. But it doesn't have to be that way. And, again, I think we can look at these sort of cities we were talking about earlier where, the reason we as Americans love going to these European cities is like, oh, it's so lovely to walk around and stroll and sit outside at a cafe. And in fact, I would argue the whole point of being in a city is to be in close proximity to other people and be able to socialize and walk around and whatnot. And when you take that opportunity away from people, cities really, in many ways, suffer.
Welcome back to Cities in Motion. I'm Jacob. This is the podcast for anyone who wants cities built for people. Each week, we dig into the systems, design, and culture that shape urban life and explore how smarter transportation, better planning, and thoughtful policy can make our communities more livable.
Today's guest is Ben Wolf, director of Changing Lanes, a featured documentary that puts a single street at the center of a much bigger fight. The film follows what happens after a beloved teacher is killed in a hit-and-run crash in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and a grassroots movement rises up to transform a notoriously dangerous four-lane boulevard into a safer street with protected bike lanes. What unfolds is part urban planning story, part political thriller, and entirely human. Along the way, the film brings in voices ranging from urban planners and activists to David Byrne and Jeanette Sadiq-Khan to ask who our streets are really for and who gets to decide. This is Ben's feature directorial debut, and as an avid cyclist and Brooklyn resident himself, the story hits close to home. This is also the season finale of Cities in Motion Season 2. We'll be back on October 2nd, so make sure you are subscribed. But for now, Ben Wolf, welcome to Cities in Motion.
Well, Ben Wolf, thank you so much for joining me on Cities in Motion. Why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself, tell me about your new project coming out?
Sure. So I'm a New York City-based filmmaker. I've been here. I grew up in California, but went east to go to college, and I've lived in New York since 1991. In that time, I mostly have been working as a cinematographer, shooting other people's projects. And over time, documentaries sort of became the thing that I was most passionate about. And I'd wanted to do my own project for many years. And finally, when the pandemic slowed down my work, I finally had time to devote to that and figuring out a project that it was meaningful to me and that was something that I could, do locally. So this movie, Changing Lanes, is sort of my documentary directing debut. And I shot it over about 3 years from, I guess, late 2022 through 2025. And it's about the sort of political struggle about what to do with a particularly dangerous street in Brooklyn called McGuinness Boulevard.
Well, I just watched it, and I gotta say it's really a really great put together documentary. It's shot well. The story is great. I loved how it ends. I was like, oh my gosh, there's only like 3 minutes left. It's no way it's ending like this, but it ended just the way everyone wants. And so thank you for putting together such a great documentary. How is I know you've had some viewings so far. How have those been going?
It's been going great. Honestly, it's been exceeding my expectations. Independent documentary is always it's hard to make these films, and it's often hard to get them shown as well. In this case, it turns out there's a real engaged and passionate audience, it turns out, for this kind of material, people that care deeply about the cities in which they live and how those places, how easy it is to move through them and to spend time outside in cities. And so it's sort of been feeding itself, which has been great. I've sort of every couple of days I'm getting requests to have it screen in different places. And it recently started streaming as well on Amazon and Canopy. So it is out in the world. If anybody watching this particularly wants to see it, they can see it now.
Very cool. So we can talk spoilers, but don't spoil it completely.
No, that's just my request as well.
Okay.
In regards to what you were saying, it does have a happy ending, which I think part of the reason people are really enjoying the movie and why it sort of can be seen, I think, as a bit inspirational and maybe something where people feel they can take some lessons from it about how to make change, which is hard to do.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to say that while I was making this movie, for most of the time, I didn't expect the ending that eventually came, and that's sort of the challenge and sometimes thrill of making documentaries is you don't really know what's going to happen, and you sort of have to follow a story where it goes.
Yeah, you can't really predict what's going to happen in 3 years, but luckily it all worked out. Tell me the process of making this documentary. What kind of equipment did you use? How did you shoot all the scenes? Who did you talk to? Stuff like that.
Sure. So I know a lot about shooting because, again, that's what I've been doing for the last 20 plus years. And one thing that I've enjoyed is that the equipment has been getting more and more portable, basically. And so a challenge that I set for myself in making this movie was to not use the minivan that I usually use to schlep my gear around. I thought maybe stuff's gotten small enough that I can literally just buy a little trailer for my bicycle and just work with the gear that I can fit in that trailer. And I did it, which was, sometimes it was exhausting, but it was fun, and I felt like it's an interesting I think it's also just a demonstration of the fact, we live in a very car-centric country, and even New York, where most people don't have cars, it turns out the streets are, by and large, really designed to accommodate cars and only cars, and there's an often people have an attitude that there's, that you can't do certain things without cars, and I wanted to show actually you can, like, you can make a documentary without cars. So that was a fun sort of thing to do, and also it allowed me to get some of the footage that's in the movie of, literally giving the feeling of what it's like to be a pedestrian or be a cyclist on these really busy, hectic streets.
Yeah. Have you always been a cyclist?
Yeah, it's something I used to race bikes, and in my later years, I've just mostly been using bikes for transportation. But I think it's a great way to get around a lot of cities. It's changed a lot in New York, which we talk about at some length in the film. I mean, in the time I've been here, it's gone from being a really unusual kind of outsider activity to something that's become quite mainstream with hundreds of thousands of people using the bike share system every day. A fair amount of good bike infrastructure, but I feel like we're only sort of halfway to where we should be to be on a par with, what I think world class infrastructure looks like, the kind of thing you see in a lot of Western Europe now or Japan.
Hmm.
You can really safely go, pretty much everywhere in a city without, yeah, where streets can accommodate a variety of vehicles other than just cars.
If you're enjoying the show, leave a rating or a like. It's a small gesture that goes a long way in helping other urbanists find the show. Now back to the show. Has your job taken you to a lot of different countries?
Yeah, I think about 40 at last count.
Oh my gosh, your passport is full. I have one. I mean, do you see any parallels between like McGuinness Boulevard and what you see over there? Do they react the same way, or do they kind of know how to handle bikes and cars and pedestrians in these different countries?
It's a complicated subject, and I don't want to oversimplify it.
Yeah.
Every city is different, every country is different. But we do go into some of the statistics, like in this film. It is undeniable that, like, in America, we have about 4 times as much injury and death on our streets per capita as Western Europe and Japan. That is a fact. And for the most part, the reason that is true is not because the people are nicer or more careful. It's because the infrastructure is designed better. And it wasn't always that way in Europe, but
Mhm.
Copenhagen and Amsterdam are often talked about as particular examples of places that are very focused on pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. But now it's true, like Paris in recent years under their mayor, Anne Hidalgo, made dramatic and quite quick change sort of systemically. The whole city, certainly the old center city, is really become much more geared again towards, keeping the cars to the side and giving precedence to people using, transit and walking and bikes. In New York, we've been moving that way slowly and in fits and starts. I think under the new mayor, I'm hoping and believe that we're about to kind of make a lot of progress after the last decade or so making not a whole lot of progress.
You have a lot of prolific guests in your documentary. Explain the process of getting a hold of those people and getting them to appear on your documentary.
Right. Well, the most famous person is the musician David Byrne, who's in the movie, and I put him in because he is a passionate about cycling. He's written a whole book about cycling around the world. I knew him from a concert film that I shot a number of years ago, where I observed firsthand that he and his band had bikes with them on tour, and they would ride their bikes in the morning to kind of decompress and see the places, where they were before they were performing in the evening. So I thought he would be a great voice for talking about cycling around the world, and also in the maybe 40, 50 years he's been doing it in New York. A lot of the other folks were either, activists fighting for change, and they were for the most part, very warm and open, looking for a way to share their hopes and aspirations. And then politicians, local politicians that were engaged, and I have not been a particularly political person, and so I was actually pleasantly surprised by how accessible those people were. The state senator, Emily Gallagher, plays a big role in the film. The Brooklyn Borough president plays a big role. Antonio Reynoso, Lincoln Ressler is assembly person in the film. All these people, basically, I just emailed them and I said, I'm doing this story about something happening in your district. Would you be willing to do an interview? And they all were, happy to do it, which was really nice, and made me, quite enthusiastic, or more interested in local politics, because these people, unlike maybe your state senator, or somebody in DC, who these people you can talk to these people, and so that was pretty exciting. The hardest interview to get was Jeanette Sadik Khan, who ran transportation under Bloomberg.
I can imagine.
Yeah, she is kind of a celebrity in the world of urban planning, and she's also on the road a lot. And I really wanted her for this movie. I thought she's super important. She's the biggest figure certainly in New York transportation since Robert Moses. I mean, it's a big deal. And anyway, when I first reached out, I just got a sort of polite, like, sounds like a great project, but we're busy, good luck kind of answer. I was just like, terrible, I can't. But I was persistent, and I ended up working with a number of people that had worked with her and under her. And so after a year and a half or two, those people kind of lobbied on my behalf, and eventually I was able to get that interview with her, which I deeply appreciated.
It was really great seeing her in the documentary.
I would also just say, this is something about making a truly independent documentary, which this was. It's not like I had CNN behind me, or the New York Times or something. This was me. So
You had your camera and your bike and your trailer.
yeah. But also, as far as establishing sort of credibility with people that don't know me,
Mhm.
it was a process, and I think it's a bit of a testament to just persistence. Like,
Mhm.
I just wouldn't take no for an. I was like, okay, I understand you're busy now, but how about in 3 months? Like, can I try you back? Or I just kept riding people, and yeah, I think, and if you show that you're serious, and at some point I was able to say, like, look, I've interviewed this person, that person, this person, this person, we really need you, and so anyway, it was great to see that eventually that worked out.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm glad it worked out. Throughout this, your documentary covers up many, many years of history on McGuinness Boulevard in the history of New York. Remind me how long you've been in New York?
I came in 1991.
Okay. We're, Throughout the many mayoral administrations, this problem has just kind of been passed along, correct? Or, what have you seen from the different administrations, and what do you hope to see from the current administration on not only this current street, but the future streets in New York?
Yeah. Yeah, and the film works on a couple levels, because we do talk about this particular street, but when we go into history, it's more citywide, that we're
Hmm.
looking at what the different administrations has done. This particular street was really created in the 1950s. It had been a small residential lane they knocked down, I think, 500 houses to widen it into almost a freeway-like street, that connected two highways, and as a result, there was a lot of fast-moving traffic, and right through a residential neighborhood, and people had to cross this thing regularly, and that's why, I heard one estimate is as many as 200 people had probably died there over the years in traffic incidents. Anyway, and there wasn't really, from the very beginning, there were people that were not happy with this situation, but it did take about 70 years before it was changed. And I just happened to be lucky enough to be, covering this story at the time when that finally happened. Streets everywhere change, because I think there's a people are very resistant to change. They become very, at least at this point in time, people seem to think that change is going to be bad, and there's a lot of people who just want to hold on to the status quo and fight any effort to do anything. And I just wanted one to make the point that if you look at the history, you can see that the way things are now, there've been many iterations that were quite
Mm.
different before that. We go back to the 100 years ago when the car was just becoming popular, or shortly before that, literally the streets were in many ways just public space where people were milling about. Commerce was happening, kids were out playing. It was like the playground for kids. In the course of the 20th century, most of that goes away in American cities, and the street becomes too dangerous for anything other than cars. And as a result, cities become a lot less pleasant places to be. And it's part of the reason I think you get suburbanization happening, where people are like, I don't want to be in that, crowded, dangerous environment. I want to go home into a relaxing, quieter place. But it doesn't have to be that way. And, again, I think we can look at these sort of cities we were talking about earlier, where, I mean, the reason we as Americans love going to these European cities is like, oh, it's so lovely to walk around and stroll and sit outside and at a cafe. And in fact, I would argue the whole point of being in a city is to be in close proximity to other people and be able to socialize and walk around and whatnot. And when you take that opportunity away from people, cities really, in many ways, suffer. There have been many efforts to reclaim public spaces from cars, or at least enable people to do other things other than drive outside, whether that's, pedestrian areas for kids to play, or bike lanes for people to ride bikes, or, many different interventions. And that's definitely picked up steam and in the time I've been here under the Bloomberg era is where we saw really pretty dramatic change, really, for the first time. And again, what had become real things like the pedestrianization of Times Square, which a lot of people said it'll never happen, it can't work.
Mhm.
There was a lot of resistance to it. It happened, and it's a done deal. And as a result, Times Square is more popular than ever. The businesses there are doing better than ever. It's much more of a destination than it ever was. So that's a kind of example of pretty dramatic change that happened. Again, that was under Bloomberg and Jeanette Sada-Khan. It's also when the city bike was introduced, which was another thing that there was a lot of skepticism about, and it's gone on. It sort of succeeded beyond, I think, most projections as far as the amount of usage. And people were saying it was going to be carnage. People were going to be, and it hasn't been. Not that there's never an incident, but it's working well for lots and lots of people.
What are you hoping to see from this current administration?
Well, with regards to streets in particular,
Yeah.
um, I'm hoping to see a much more sort of systemic approach. I think what we've seen in the last since it again in Bloomberg time, we saw pretty dramatic change on a big scale, and so as a result, we got like good protected bike infrastructure on maybe, I don't know. I'm just going to randomly say like 10% of streets of New York or something.
Sounds good.
Uh, you know, which is better than nothing, and a lot of it is the really important streets, like some of the big avenues in Manhattan. So, and that's great, but what about all the people that live in other areas? Or, it's very incomplete. And since then, we've had this attitude again of sort of putting band-aids on things, especially after something terrible happens. Like, oh, someone was run over on that corner. Let's improve the traffic light on that corner or something. But we're not thinking systemically. We're not
Mhm.
thinking, you know, why don't we address, like, there's a proposal which Mamdani, I believe, supports to daylight all intersections in New York City, which means, eliminate parking right up to the corners so there's much better visibility at corners. That's the kind of systemic change that I want to see happen, where we're not being piecemeal about this and we're not waiting for a tragedy to fix a one little area. There's probably also another dozen streets that are as dangerous as McGuinness Boulevard, which is this one that I follow in this movie. And those, have not been done. So it's again, I would love to see, and I think again, we will see if, we'll see what actually happens, but the indications are good that this mayor is willing to expend political capital to push these things through, because in every case, there are very loud and sometimes, well-connected voices that don't want to see change. Ironically, often those people in the end up benefiting, but they still are worried and concerned that they're going to lose something. And so they often sort of dig in. And if politicians aren't willing to, you know, upset some people in the short run, I mean, they're going to upset some people no matter what they do. But it's like, unless they're willing, I think in some cases, just sort of letting the status quo go is the easier political choice. It's than like rocking the boat and sort of taking a little bit of a, putting your neck out there. But I think it looks like Mamdani is again, I don't want to reward him for things that aren't done yet, but it sounds like he's serious about it. On day 3 of his administration, he actually went to McGuinness Boulevard and had a press conference to talk about that street in two ways. One is a sign of as a sort of symbol of the corruption of the previous administration, which had really slow walked the safety improvements that the DOT had come up with. And also to talk about it as an example moving forward that should be looked at sort of more systemically, like similar interventions should be done on every big, dangerous, street to make it safer for everybody.
Yeah, make it safe for 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds and people riding bikes and grandmothers and grandpas, and like you brought up many times in the documentary.
I would
There's
add also that, when somebody the people in a car that happens to kill somebody are also victims in a way. Like the rest of their life, they're going to have to live with that. It's no good for anybody,
Mhm.
And so I think it's important to emphasize that. And I also just kind of keep reminding the audience for my film that I'm also a driver. I have a car. I don't want to be seen as just, oh, you're just some partisan. You're just making a propaganda film. It's absolutely not the way I look at this. I just think we have streets that are good for one use and one type of person, when in fact there's a lot of different uses and a lot of type of people, and we need to do our best to accommodate everyone and not just accommodate a few people at the expense of everybody else.
Yeah, I like that. There's a lot of different kinds of people. And I think it's important that the opposition like knows that they're opposing the street, but it's actually trying to help vulnerable populations, people who just want to walk or have to walk. What was it like communicating or lack thereof to the opposition to this street change?
Yeah, that's one of the most challenging aspects of this film, because I did when I would show up at certain events, people would ask me like, "Whose side are you on?" And I would just say, "I'm not on a side. I'm trying to make a documentary." Of course, I have my own views. Everybody in the world has
Mhm.
views, but I didn't want to be one-sided, and I tried to talk. I wanted to talk to everyone and get everybody's point of view. In the way it played out is that the leadership of the folks that were fighting for change were very open and excited to share. The leadership of the group that was opposing change was very difficult, sort of cagey. They never exactly said, no, we won't talk to you, but it was always like, well, we'll get back to you. And then they wouldn't, like months are going by, so ultimately I feel like I tried. And, you know, we get to see them, how they represent themselves publicly in marches and events and things, but I was unable to get a formal interview with them. And I do believe that that also does show there are some differences between the two sides. It's not, yeah, well, I think that there are, good people on both sides. I also think that one of the sides in general was more transparent, and the other was in some regards, I think, had more of a business agenda that they were trying to, cover with this sort of, we would call it astroturfing, trying to look like a grassroots organization when I don't really believe, in fact, that they were.
Yeah.
And I
You
would
have
also say, I don't think there's anything wrong with business interests. Again, I also run a small business, a film production business, and again, it's a democracy. Everybody needs to be involved in decision making, but nobody should get precedence over everybody else. And again, without sort of ruining the twist in terms of the movie, there was real corruption going on behind the scenes, payoffs and things to influence events, and that's sort of fundamentally not the way democracy is supposed to work.
Of course, of course. Some of these moments in the film when like the opposition was getting like there's a lot of conflict in the room, I was like getting anxious just watching it because people were upset. They're scared of change and they have right to be scared of change. But I think I think everybody who was for this street change was had a lot of facts and a lot of data behind them. And I think they had a lot of good intentions for keeping people safe and the health of the community. What other people helped you put this documentary together?
The There were, I would say, 3 other really significant players. By far, the most essential collaborator was my editor, Kristen Bai, who, is really great and did great work on this film. And I probably shot about 100 hours over 3 years, and she did a lot to help winnow that down and shape it in a way that, that the final form of the film works. And I had a lot of ideas about how to structure it, but a lot of the ideas came from her and us bouncing ideas off each other. It's a really hard job to do that. The other main collaborators were my archival producer, Prudence Arndt, who helped come up with a lot of that, great old footage of the city at different in its different eras, and my music composer, Andrew Morocco, who also I'm very happy with the work he did. It was a very small team, and I did, literally all of the production myself, which is not the way movies are normally done. So those interviews, I would literally ride my bike to somebody's house or a park or something, set up the camera,
Mhm.
sit them down, sit behind the camera and talk to them. And without like, I didn't have a other sound person, another camera person or whatever. It's a bit challenging to work that way, but I thought it was again, it sort of went with this idea of could I make a movie just biking around? And there's some pluses to it too, because I think it's less intimidating for people. There's not like a whole group of people milling around and hovering over them. It's just, I think it was easier for people to just sort of have a
Yeah.
conversation.
So it's only your editor, composer, and then the archival compared to a full team in a normal movie that probably saved a lot of money. Or it probably made your documentary a lot cheaper compared to any other documentary.
Yeah, well, that was one of the goals also because this was self-funded, and I've
Yeah.
also been amused because some of the people are pretty cynical, so especially the people that some of the very vocal people who hate bike lanes and hate any change of the street heard about this movie and they were saying like, "Who's funding this thing?" and "Follow the money" and all this, and I was just like, "Yeah, follow the money. You'll find it, dwindling in my shrinking nest." There's no special interest behind this thing.
Mm.
There are a lot of other people that had roles, smaller roles that I haven't mentioned, colorists and, especially in the sort of technical aspects of finishing a film. But it was about as small as you can make a movie. At the same time, even a movie this small, it ends up being not so inexpensive, at least for somebody of sort of modest means such as myself. It's yeah, it just I mean, Kristen, the editor, worked more or less a full year, and paying a professional for a year of their life to do something is what it is. And and then again, the archival producer had to spend a lot of time, and in some cases, I had to purchase rights to things. It's just so I can't exactly say maybe I'm slightly surprised that even with my efforts to keep the budget super small, it's still a few $100,000 that it's hard to get much below that, and obviously I didn't pay myself anything, so all that was, like, free.
Well, I think it looks really great and it's really awesome story. I definitely learned a ton about McGuinness Boulevard in New York and the administrations through your documentary. So thank you for all your work over the last 3 years, and also your team. So where can people find your documentary? Where can people view it?
Right, so it is streaming now on Amazon and Canopy. I think Amazon is pretty much just domestic right now, but I believe Canopy is worldwide. Also, if people are interested in hosting a screening, they should feel free to reach out to me, and that's happening pretty regularly. It's been screening for different sort of civic groups and local governments around the country, which has been really fun. And part of the reason that I think I made this movie is it turns out that although this is a local story, extremely similar conflicts and stories are playing out in cities everywhere, and I don't think people appreciate as much as they should how similar these fights are. Even like in my neighbor, I live about 5 miles away from McGuinness Boulevard in a neighborhood called Carroll Gardens, and we had a street here called Court Street that in the last year had a very similar, took away a lane of cars, and the same exact drama plays out over and over and over again, and the same. And it's not that nobody can have any misgivings about these changes. I think there's all kinds. There's not every change is perfect for every last person, and businesses, for instance, can have real concerns about I need a loading zone or things that just may have to be adjusted. But I do think there's been a real lack of sort of communication and understanding of how these changes work and how they play out, and maybe businesses would be reassured if, for instance, they learned, usually after these changes, businesses thrive because it actually tends to attract people, rather, and where people spend more time and
Mm-hmm.
walking is where businesses do well. When they're just driving by in a car, is not particularly good for business. So that, anyway, it's my hope that this small story can resonate in a lot of places, and it does seem to be doing that. Some people can learn something from it, and also maybe take a little inspiration that change is positive change is possible, but that it requires a changing the status quo where people are used to something is not easy, and just that people get a sense of the effort required and the organization required, but also that it is possible.
What are some books that you've read on the topic? I'm sure you've done a lot of research and experienced a lot about city planning and bike lanes and all that great stuff that we are talking about. What are some books that you've read recently or listened to that you would recommend to people?
Right. Well, the biggest thing, which took me like a year to read, was The Power Broker, which, if you're interested in New York City, the
Mm-hmm.
history of the city, the history of the government, and the infrastructure of New York, is sort of an essential book. It's like 1,200 pages, but it's an amazing book. That's probably number one. I read a good dozen books in preparation for this film. Jesse Singer's book, There Are No Accidents. She's one of the interviews in the film, and she talks to, I think it's an important book in understanding that accidents aren't actually accidents. They're the result of, usually bad planning, bad design, and therefore things that we should be doing something about and not just sort of accepting them. What else? Doug Gordon has a new book out, which I think the book might be titled The War on Cars, or it might be
Yes. Life After Cars.
Life After Cars.
Yeah.
Um,
So, Doug Gordon and Sarah Goodyear. Yeah.
Correct. That was a great book. Those are the ones that are springing to mind immediately. I'm sure. Oh, also Henry Grabar is featured in the movie, and he's an author. He wrote a book, Paved Paradise, about
Mhm.
specifically really about the role of car parking on the design of cities, which turns out to be huge. The amount of space we devote to storing automobiles that had once been public space, like literally, it's sort of half the public space of most cities is devoted to storage of private property. That was an eye opener.
Mhm. Thanks so much for doing this, taking the time. I hope everything's going to go well with your documentary, Changing Lanes. Any last words before we close out?
Well, thanks for having me. I just did want to say that the website for the film is changinglanesdoc, like doc.com. And people can see the trailer there. They can also connect with me if perhaps you're interested in hosting a screening or something like that.
Okay. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Over the coming weeks, we will continue to explore the people and projects that are putting our cities in motion. You can follow Cities in Motion on Instagram for behind-the-scenes content and updates for the show. I'm Jacob, and thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Don't forget to keep your cities in motion.